Have you ever heard a musical artist described as having great chops? What does that mean? Well, the term chops is slang in the music business that refers to an artist that has developed great skills over time, whether they are a musician, composer, producer, or other titles associated with the music business. This is Scott Grimaldi, your host of Got Chops. Join me as I interview one musical artist per episode that I've had the pleasure of either performing, recording, or work with in my career. Plus, I'll be interviewing artists I've always wanted to speak with. We'll discover how each artist developed their chops, listen to their stories, and much more. This is Got Chops.
Talk to me, help me see the things I cannot see. Help me be the man I could not be, even when I'm gone. Waltz with me, learn the steps and carry on with me. Shoot the moon right through the used to be, even when I'm gone. And I will dance with thee, even when I'm gone. Your face is all I see, even when I'm gone.
My special guest artist for today is an American singer, songwriter, guitarist, and co-founder of the New Jersey indie folk acoustic duo, Jackson Pines. That's him on the track behind me, singing and playing guitar on his original composition, Even When I'm Gone. After a chance encounter with Pete Seeger a number of years ago, he knew that he was going to become a folk singer and songwriter. He's been described as a gifted songwriter who is not afraid to write about serious situations and difficult emotional perspectives. Billboard magazine said that his acoustic duo, Jackson Pines, is like a mashup of James Taylor and Tom Petty, with serious focus on acoustic guitar. This talented and highly introspective music artist certainly got chops. Please welcome Joseph Makoviecki. Good morning, Joseph. This is Scott from Got Chops. How are you?
Doing great. It's great to hear from you. Good morning.
Oh, good morning. For my listeners, Joseph Makoviecki, who is one of the co-founders of the indie folk acoustic duo Jackson Pines from South Jersey, I've known for many, many years through a family member, which we'll talk about a little later. So, as a songwriter, vocalist, guitarist, what does the music slang Got Chops mean to you?
So, chops to me is a musician's technical ability based on talent, but combined with work ethic, I would have to say. You can't really have one without the other in my mind, although especially the work ethic part will take your chops way further than talent alone, I would say.
Spot on. That's really great. And I'm sure you know from your upbringing that chops, if someone refers to someone that got chops, especially in the early part of the century, it referred to brass players and their embouchure, their lip placement, but then it became more generic.
Right, because I would hear, like, growing up with my dad and being a horn player and most of his closest musical friends being horn players, it would be used that way very often as well. I played trombone when I was going through, elementary and middle school, and I would hear that version of it very often as well, such as like, don't lose your chops. You got to keep your chops up, that kind of thing. But then I guess it kind of expanded more generally to music.
So we'll talk about your dad in a little while, but growing up, you did hear your dad and his friends say that quite often.
Yes, I heard it from my dad. It's one of the earliest things I remember about my dad when he was talking music. My room when I was born was originally his music room and office. And then when I was born, my crib went in and it became my room. So he still had his band phone line in there. in the days where you'd have a separate phone number for the band and you had an answering machine in there. And I remember him talking to people on the phone as a little kid. He'd say, okay, but does he got the chops? When he'd need like an alternate horn player if someone could make a gig. Does he got chops or does he have the chops was just the language he spoke, musician talk. I was always around it as a kid.
Absolutely. And you've adopted it, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
So I know you were born and raised in Jackson, New Jersey, which is located in the Pine Barrens, which is also called the Pinelands for my listeners that do not know that phrase. And you come from a musical family. So besides your dad, did everyone in your immediate family play an instrument and or sing?
So not everyone, but a lot. So not everyone played music, but my older sister, Lauren, played saxophone like my dad all throughout school and up until the end of high school. My mom would have never called herself musical, but sang in my childhood, sang to me, sang to herself. She could sing, though she never would say that or admit that. Only sang to her kids, in more of a maternal fashion. But my little brother, Alex, plays guitar and sings for fun. He's really good now. He's been posting videos on TikTok and Instagram just for fun. And he's really good. And my little sister, Claire, can sing too and play guitar a bit. She played clarinet in school. My brother Alex played trumpet and drums in school. So it definitely rubbed off on all the kids for sure.
That's great. So I believe you live in Pennsylvania now.
Yeah, I live in Philadelphia. I have for, like I said, about 7 years in the same neighborhood. I like it a lot because I can still work in New Jersey and New York City, but also in Philadelphia and DC very easily, Baltimore. It's just a really good location, and I could literally work in Manhattan during the day and be back before dinner sometimes, depending on what I'm doing, if I take the train or whatnot. So it's been very convenient. And before that, I lived in New Egypt, New Jersey for a little bit, and I also lived in Manhattan when I was in college for the first time.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think that's a great place to live. As a musician, we both understand that if you live locally, or centrally located in Jersey, like you said, you can get to Manhattan, you can get to Philly, without too much of a strain. If you live too far north or too far south, that adds a lot of extra time on your travel, right?
Yeah, I love the Midwest and I love the West and playing out in the South, but it is kind of sweet as a Northeast musician to be so close to so much and to be able to get places so quickly when you want to work. It's great.
I agree. So at what age did you begin to play and study music?
So I began trying to play music and sing as early as I could. My dad brought home a classical guitar for me when I was about 3, and I would strum and bang on it, but didn't know chords, of course. I was very young. It was a full-size guitar, and I was small. But I began singing very early, around 3, and never stopped since then. The reason was my dad taped a Phil Collins live in Dallas concert in 1985. Solely because the Earth, Wind, and Fire horn section were in the live band. So he wanted the recording to watch the horn section, listen to them. And inadvertently, I became obsessed with Phil Collins and his live band. I, as a 3 and 4-year-old, would wear the same outfit he wore on stage, like sometimes just every day, like the preschool, I'd wear a white button down with the pants and the gold chain. I did the whole routine. I learned the whole set. And I sang that set almost daily for like 2 or 3 years. So that's a lot of practice when you think about singing along. So, the amount of hours I put into it just by the time I was like 5, 6, or 7 was actually a lot when you think about it. And they never discouraged me. And somehow my grandma, my aunt, my mom and dad somehow put up with that tape being on every single day, sometimes twice. But that really started me going was singing.
So that was a pivotal moment and a pivotal musical artist for you.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
for my listeners, my young listeners, because I come across this quite frequently when you mention someone that you and I know of, not so many of the younger people, the musicians, know of these names. So why don't you tell my young listeners who Phil Collins is?
So Phil Collins started off as the drummer of a progressive rock band, Genesis, in the early 70s and stayed with that band all the way to the 90s. Ended up being the front man of that band when Peter Gabriel left. And in the 80s, he had a solo pop career that just blew the doors off the industry, sold a lot of records. And in his solo band, he did things differently than he did in his rock band, meaning having a full horn section, getting drummers from other great bands and other great musicians in on the whole project. And you might recognize Phil Collins from, younger folks might know him from the great Disney soundtracks he did in the 2000s, such as Tarzan, Brother Bear. But also, he's really well known for the drum fill in the song In the Air Tonight, which I think there was a viral YouTube video of two young folks listening and reacting to that song, and it got millions of views because they loved it so much. So yeah, you should check that out.
Yeah, that's a classic drum fill.
Yes.
And anyone interested in playing that style of music needs to listen to that and listen to Phil Collins. It's funny, just the other day, trending on social media was Phil Collins. I think he's going to go out again and do a little mini tour, but I understand that he's not feeling too well lately, so I hope he pulls that off.
Yes, I actually finally, all these years, so I had the Phil Collins tape and I had a Genesis live tape from '86, and I memorized them both. And I finally saw Genesis for the first time on their last tour in Philadelphia last winter. And yeah, he only could sing, but his son played the drums.
Oh,
And it's unbelievable when you sometimes get these children of great drummers. Sometimes, not always, but Phil Collins' son, Nick, he hits like Phil. Like there's a difference, with drummers. You could play the same beat, but some people don't hit the same. You know what I'm saying?
oh, I do, sure.
And he hits just like Phil. It sounds, the drums resonate like Phil. It helps that he's playing his old drum kits as well, but Nick Collins really did the job. It was really cool to see.
Wow, that's excellent. That's nice to hear. So, was guitar your first instrument?
So guitar was the first instrument that I became proficient at. Yes. So at the time I was singing, I was into Phil Collins. He was a singing drummer. I wanted to play drums. My dad got me a snare drum and I had fun banging on it. But I was again around 3, 4, 5. And I was never strictly or regimented, pushed into like learning an instrument until I was ready to. My dad believed in allowing me to choose what and when, whereas some kids, and there's nothing, I'm not against this in any way. Some kids start at a certain age, whether they want to or not, and it's just part of your education, and that's okay. My father was not into that for his own children. So the snare drum, I had fun with it, but it kind of sat around for a little while. And then finally, when I was about 8 or 9 years old, my dad bought me my first electric guitar, and that truly became my first instrument. It was a black Mexican Stratocaster, and he took me to his old band's guitarist since he was a young man, one of his best friends, Johnny Frank, and he gave me my first lesson when I was about 9 years old.
Wow, that's great. And when did you become interested in composing original songs and singing?
So a few years later, I discovered that I could teach myself songs using the internet. Like this is like 2000, 2001, when the internet was not brand new, but starting to be used more and more. And that's really when I taught myself how to play acoustic rhythm guitar. And that's when I really, really learned how to play the guitar, like for real. I could hold down, rhythm and learn a lot of my chords. So that summer, I was around 11 years old in my room in my dad's attic, and I got Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars and They Might Be Giants album called Apollo 11. And I spent that whole summer in my room printing out the chords and the lead sheets and figuring out how to play both of those albums front to back. And that not only taught me how to play rhythm guitar, but it also opened up to me the inner workings of songwriting, especially guitar-based songwriting. So I was off from there.
Wow, that's great. So, how would you label your writing style?
So my writing style, when it comes to musically, is very, very much indebted to the American singer-songwriter tradition of the 1960s and 70s, especially, and then the roots of that, and now more than ever, also the American folk revival guitar playing styles, and also some of the early blues finger style picking styles of guitar players like Mississippi John Hurt and Elizabeth Cotton are now sort of the central north and south pole of what I'm kind of doing musically when I write now on the guitar. But still many songs are very indebted to the classic 70s singer-songwriter sound. people like James Taylor and Bob Dylan and Joni Mitchell and Joan Baez, all those greats who were very guitar centric. And then when it comes to my lyrical style, I tend to be a kind of like confessional folk writer, folk songwriter. Many of my songs are personal, not all of them, but a lot of them are inspired by either real life to me or things that we've experienced or stories we've heard, people we've met on the road as we travel, all the different threads, stories from where we grew up. And, they're not all story songs, but they all have that bent to it for sure.
That's wonderful. And I mean, that's how great songs emerge. I mean, especially if you're writing about something that you're familiar with. I mean, that makes you an expert at it. And when you really understand the topic because you lived through it or knew people that lived through it,
Right.
that becomes the interesting part. And people want to listen to that and say, oh, wow, I can relate to that.
That is the amazing thing about it is, you write all these dozens and dozens, sometimes hundreds of songs. But to get one song that we've recorded, maybe that someone comes up to us a year or two later and just explains an experience that they've had with the material, that's why we do it. Just the one person that says this song, it's like you wrote it for me. I understand what that feels like. Or this song became me and my husband's first dance because we first heard this when we started dating. Just all those things that when music kind of embeds itself in someone's life and then you find out about it, that it's your song, kind of brings it all full circle. And that's why I do it, because songs have done that for me my whole life as well.
Wonderful. It's coming full circle, as they say.
Yeah.
So before we talk about you as an artist and your band, if it's okay, I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about your dad, who was a dear friend of mine. As you know, he was a great bari sax player, arranger, and music educator who left us all too soon in 2010.
Yeah. And that's how I know you as well, through him.
Right.
My dad was a rare person in that he had the ability to make anyone feel in on it, whatever that was. Whether it was just a conversation like he had with the postman in the morning about the New York Knicks, or whether he was teaching a room of middle schoolers how to perform as a band and listen to one another while playing. He just had this kind of magic charisma that was hard to deny. So he was, like you said, a teacher. He was a band director, a performer, working baritone sax player in the New York City tri-state area, but also a lover of ideas and scientific or philosophical conversation. But at the end of the day, of course, he was just my dad. He's been gone for, about 12 years now, but miss him every single day. There's always something, new I wish I could tell him about, whether it was musical or some kind of scientific discovery. But that was my dad.
Well, I'm sure he hears you when you're thinking about him. I believe in that.
I think about him when I'm performing all the time.
Oh, I bet you do. And he's enjoying every bit of it and so proud of you. If you don't mind, I'd like to add a couple of things of, my memories of your dad, Tom Makoviecki.
Please.
That's one of the notes I was going to share with you. Yeah, anyone that he met, he made them feel special. It doesn't matter if he knew them, if he never knew them. It doesn't matter what their upbringing, what their education was. He made everyone feel important and special. And when he created a connection like that, it really stirred up emotion in the musicians that we were playing with. We all noticed it. It was very evident. We all admired that and looked up to him. And to this day, there are musicians that I play with that we'll talk about that, saxophonist that we used to belong to your dad's saxophone quintet years ago.
Yes.
And I see them occasionally, or I'll sub for them, or I'll be in the same sax section. And 9 out of 10 times, either that person or I will say, man, I miss Tom. And they'll say the same thing, man, if only I could be as good as Tom, the way he looked at life and the way he loved people and treated everyone with kindness and respect. Everyone to this day, I just want to let you know that we all say the same things all the time. And it, makes me choke up and tear up. And I knew of him, through the people we used to go and hang with or play with. And I knew him from his Boulevard East band. And I knew him as an educator also. he called me one time and said, "Hey, I don't know if you're interested, but if you are, that'd be great. I'm putting together a saxophone quintet." And as a saxophonist, if you study classical and contemporary like I did, a quintet you normally see in a big band setting: two altos or a soprano and alto, two
Right.
tenors and a bari. But you normally see that in big band settings. But he would pluck that out of the big band and play it just as a standing ensemble. And it was just incredible. Mostly you would see in the saxophone world, saxophone quartet, trio, whatever, like all the other chamber ensembles. But I said,
Right.
wow, this sounds fantastic. So I remember the first time I played, and to let my listeners know, we would play every winter in Princeton before I started teaching in the Princeton school districts. Um, it was amazing. We would be at Palmer Square, we'd play for the tree lighting, and then for the next 2 or 3 weekends, we would play at the different places in Palmer Square outside and then strolling. And sometimes it was very cold, sometimes it wasn't. But when the guys played, it was like, I don't care how cold or how hot this is incredible. I can't pass this up. After the gig, I went home and I got inspired, and I just sat down and I wrote an arrangement. And it was because I know your dad really enjoyed funk. He was a big fan of Tower Power. He used to bring Tower Power to his middle school and high school in Carteret where he taught. And when I saw that there, I'm going, oh my God, this is an incredible way of inspiring and motivating these kids. But he would bring that, element into his arranging style. It was great. So I went home, I arranged something, and the next morning we had to meet, at the parking garage, to go over some things. I said, hey, Tom, it's up to you. I arranged one song for the guys. It's for you. If you don't like it, that's fine. If you do, that's cool. So we ran through it, and I'll never forget, he stops and he pauses, and then he rattles off all these musical analysis things that we do in music school. And it just touched me. So, man, please write some more. So lo and behold, like for the next 10 years, I believe, I wrote a catalog of how many songs, and I loved writing for that group and bringing it to him. So I was honored, to be in that group. And at your dad's funeral, as you remember, or you might not because you were quite young, they said, we would like Dad's saxophone quintet to play, at the church, and you to play his bari sax part. And I don't know how I got through that because I was standing next to one of the saxophonists. I said, I'm going to break down any second. So it was tough. But
yeah, that is an amazing. And did you play your baritone sax, or did you play hit?
No, I played my baritone.
Yeah, that is a huge. That's a huge, not weight, but a huge duty to have to perform. And it's one of those moments where a performance of music really is stretched to the extreme, right? How many times do we do our job and we're very used to it and the paces of going through it, but then you're put into a different room with a different situation, and it just like the whole thing changes. But he was never happier than when he knew that he was getting a new arrangement for the quintet from you.
Oh, isn't that nice of you?
He would be excited on the way. No, I remember the time you brought him. You did a great arrangement, and it was a medley of Shake Your Body and Sir William.
Oh my God.
By Michael Jackson and Stevie Wonder.
That's right.
And I remember the first time and I think it might have been one of those situations where you brought it, and in the parking garage right there on Palmer Square,
right,
the guys did a sight read through, and I'm sure you guys were performing it by the end of that first night. And I still remember it. I remember almost the whole thing by ear to this day. But yeah, he loved all those moments and all those pieces, and especially he was always excited and honored that you would arrange for that group, which was admittedly, a little bit of a quirky group. Like you said, it was not experimental maybe, but it was definitely avant-garde, like you said, in the way that to pluck that out of the big band setting and let it be its own rhythm section. There was always a lot of really cool stuff you did, whether you guys were playing James Brown under the tree,
Right.
or you were going into a Bach chorale.
Right.
You guys did it all. And that's what my dad loved about it, was the ability to go from one to the other without being confined by the usual concert setting. He loved to be able to just jump through like a free-form radio station, because that's what he listened to.
So I read that it was meeting and playing with the American folk singer slash banjo player Pete Seeger years ago that inspired you to follow in his path. So what were the reasons for this decision?
So I had been learning guitar. I'm 11 years old, 12, teaching myself how to be a rhythm guitarist and starting to write some of my first ideas and songs. That led me to, when I was around that age too, the Beatles really dawned on me for the first time. And that, of course, opened Pandora's box of songwriting. I'm starting to begin to understand the basics of pop songwriting. And then in high school, I really got into indie rock, bands like Radiohead, songwriters like Bright Eyes, Joanna Newsom. These were quirky artists that wrote really unique or complex songs. But there's still a lot of pop, mentality in there when you really actually break down what's going on, even if someone has a unique voice or likes angular chord progressions, right? There's always some kind of pop sentiment in there. So now fast forward to around the end of high school, by the time I'm like 19, my dad was very, very sick, and he passed away. I was 20. I was living in Manhattan at the time, studying English and creative writing in college. But my friends would come up to the city almost every weekend, and we would play folk music. We would go to Washington Square, as you do, and we would stand under the arch, and we'd start woodshedding all these old folk tunes that we like, stuff from the 40s and 50s, Woody Guthrie songs, old ballads, Civil War tunes, things that we just could get our hands on, and writing our own songs too. We were a trio with acoustic guitars and one banjo, and 3 singers, which was great. So one night after we were playing a coffee house in Keyport, New Jersey, a friend's parent came up to us and invited us to join them next week to go to Beacon, New York, to a meeting of the Hudson River Sloop Club, which Pete Seeger had built a boat in the late 60s, early 70s that sailed and continues to this day to sail up and down the river, educating people about water conservation. And him and his group really helped clean up the Hudson over the last, 50 years. So after they have their environmentalism meeting every month, there's a folk circle of song at the end. And the word was, if you went there on the right month, you would see Pete Seeger and he would be there and would perform. So we went, and sure enough, there he was. Pete Seeger, just like you or me, walking around, helping carry chairs, helping clean up after. The bowl at the potluck that the salad was in was this huge wooden bowl that was from his house. And he even at one point, I'll never forget this, he set his banjo on the ground in the dirt and walked away from it at one point for like 20 minutes. I couldn't help but think my dad would have freaked out over that. He wouldn't have approved of that.
Yes.
Putting your instrument on the ground and leaving it alone. But that's Pete Seeger for you, and Pete Seeger in his in one of his closest tight circles, of course, as well. Then my dad did pass away, unfortunately, in 2010. And later, a couple weeks later, we went to Beacon again, and we decided in the circle of song, it was our turn. So we decided to sing the spiritual, "Oh Mary, Don't You Weep." And we led the circle to sing along with us, a la Pete Seeger. That was one of his main unique performance styles, was that Pete Seeger would take a concert and flip it on its head by saying, I'm the only musician on stage right now. You're in the audience. How about you sing and I'll listen to you while I play? So he always was able to get the whole crowd to sing along, and that was kind of his thing. So we learned how to do that. And we're doing it, and Pete Seeger is right there. He's a couple people down the line in the circle. And during verse 2, he decided to hop up, and he joined us on a verse and stood up there with us and sang, played the banjo. And his verse was, God gave Noah the rainbow sign, no more water, fire next time. And then he just like clutched up his banjo and turned back around and sat down and was smiling. And I looked up and down, I looked around, and I was like, everything is different now. Like my life from that moment kind of changed forever in some strange, almost mystical way, but I would say in a musical way. I know Pete, he sang with hundreds of thousands of people in his life because of this performance style that I described. But at that moment, it was just a real turning point in my musical and personal life. I honestly wasn't really sure the means I would need to find to survive the grief that was consuming my life at that point. So that night really it sparked a fuse for me and really set in stone that the singer songwriter and folk music thing that I was starting to fall into and becoming very passionate about was in fact the correct course in music for me that I needed to follow. And I have never looked back since. It felt like being baptized in the spirit of music, kind of like I was saying before.
Oh, wow. That's a great way of putting it. Bravo. Well, that comes from your lyric writing and, how you reflect on life and, catchy phrases. That's, wow, bravo. I love that. So that leads into the next question. So let's talk about your indie folk acoustic duo, Jackson Pines, that includes you on vocals, guitar, and James Black on upright bass and banjo. Share with my listeners how you met, how long you've been together, the process of co-writing songs together, your albums and career highlights, opening for main acts that include Mumford & Sons, up to current day when you'll be headlining at the famous Stone Pony in Asbury Park on November 5th, where your dad also played with his funk band back in the 1970s.
Yeah, so we've been together as Jackson Pines for about 6 years, since 2016. But before that, we both were also in a band with more members named Thomas Wesley Stern. And that was the band that goes back to those nights in Washington Square and Beacon in 2010. So we were both full-time members. They were both our band. We were, we all had ownership of the band. We weren't just, side players. And yeah, so it's been about 12 years now altogether that I've been in the same band with my musical partner and best friend, James Black. We met in our hometown of Jackson, New Jersey. He went to the public school. I went to Catholic school. But the local music scene at the time was so big and varied that we hung out all the time. We met through our high school bands that would play shows together, whether it was a matinee at the Pony in Asbury Park, where we did play when we were 13, or church halls in Jackson or Howell, because that's where kids our age could afford to rent out the hall for the night. So those shows happened every weekend. We'd play every month or two. So he was always known as a great punk and a great rock and roll bass player, electric bass. So when our folk band started playing bigger shows and needed that bass sound, we wanted to really fill out the bottom end. We asked him if he could learn stand-up bass. And believe it or not, he borrowed one from a friend, and he did just that. He taught himself stand-up bass by ear by playing along to his favorite records, stuff like Hank Williams Sr., Johnny Cash, Bob Wills and his Texas Playboys, that kind of stuff. So James really kind of brings the country element and that country swing element to the band that kind of balances out my more folk and indie rock tendencies. So when it comes to writing stuff, the process is actually pretty straightforward. I conceive all the ideas of the songs and the primary chord progressions. I'm the main one to come up with the melodies and the lyrical motifs and lines, and I write a lot of stuff. So then I'll show James things that I'm particularly excited about that I'm writing, and he'll help me decide which ones are actually right for us and which ones to work up into a duo or a full band arrangement. So he's kind of like quality control. He picks out what's good from what's just another song, but he also helps fill out the arrangement. He writes his own bass parts that'll sometimes inform and change the chords that I may be playing. He might add a note here. That means I'll drop out a note there that will allow him to have a different note in the bass, or sometimes he'll help steer the chord progression. But I start everything, and he really helps to finish everything.
So it's a true collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. On all the songs, each single song has to be one that we both feel very strongly for and strongly about, personally and musically.
So how have the critics described the sound of Jackson Pines?
Well, I believe, I don't have it in front of me here and I haven't memorized it, but I believe that when we were lucky enough a couple years ago to have the EP of ours reviewed in Billboard magazine on their website, I believe the quote was like a mashup of Tom Petty and James Taylor with a serious focus on acoustic guitar. So I think that sums it up in a nice way, because although my voice might not sound exactly like theirs, like I said before, the song structures and the roots going back to old folk and 70s singer-songwriter is there. And there's a huge influence on my rhythmic picking on guitar and the way that James and I complement each other with his bass rhythms as well.
Well, first of all, that quote, that's high praise.
Yeah, very honored.
My God, you must have been blown away when you first saw that.
Yeah, I mean, it's still to this day, it kind of feels like almost like they're writing about someone else.
Right.
But I try to push away the imposter syndrome a little bit. But you best believe that that's still at the top of our press kit.
And they could definitely hear that you and your partner have a fat sound. There's another musical slang, fat.
Yes.
P-H-A-T. You probably heard that from your dad.
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
So, in addition to your playing career, you recently finished and received a Bachelor of Music degree. Share with my listeners the promise you made to your mom regarding this degree, and then talk about what it was like to study traditional music during the day in music college and then play folk music at night and on the weekends.
Yeah. So I was going to NYU in Manhattan about, I guess, 13, 14 years ago, and my dad was sick. My dad got ill when I was finishing high school and then passed away a couple years into college. So around the time that he was ill, though, that's when the folk band was getting going. And we were playing shows in New York City and beyond and meeting people. And we actually like had this manager type person. I won't say truly manager because she wasn't with an agency, but did all she could to help us and really tried to help push us to the next level. And I started to find myself going to meetings at the Warner Music Group building instead of class sometimes, or I found myself going to shows instead of taking tests. And then when my father passed away, and then I played with Pete Seeger, that summer I decided I was going to leave college and just play music full time. And although my mom was, upset, and she never forced me to go back and never made me feel absolutely, unwelcomed or anything like that. She understood and allowed me to leave school, but I knew deep down it always was on her mind and always something that she wished that I would have finished. And like, it would be years later, I'd be at her house for a day or two between runs on the road or between being in wherever I was, New York or something. And she would just say very simply, like, you ever think you'll go back and just finish it? And I would say, no. And that's it. It wouldn't be a long conversation. She wouldn't guilt me with anything like that. She would always say that. And I always remembered that. And unfortunately, she became ill herself a couple years ago. And I had toyed around with reapplying once or twice, even to the point of filling out the application and not sending it in to school. Because it was always on my mind too, because I knew it was the main thing that my dad and mom wanted for me. And so then when she got sick, I promised her that I would finish college. And unfortunately, she was very ill when I found out, but I found out that I was reaccepted back into my old school. And unfortunately, she passed away in the summer of 2019. I started going back to school in September of 2019 and then I switched over to, BA in music at the College of Arts and Sciences. And then COVID happened, but I was able to finish it through Zoom. And I got my degree actually last year and just graduated in May, went to the ceremony and everything. So I kept my promise. And it turned out after all those years of thinking that I wouldn't study music, traditionally. I always thought I would study on my own, but I always thought I would study English traditionally. I ended up with the same bachelor degree as my dad. So there you go.
Wow. I'm sure they're so delighted and happy to see that you did that, because that was, fitting all that in. What a dedication. But I remember on social media when you posted that, I was so proud of you when I said, wow, excellent. Good for you.
Well, thank you. And it was, in some other way, it was a circle closing on the other side. When my father passed, I left. When my mom passed, I went back and I completed, the mission. And it was going back. I had more of a joyful experience and I had more fun in class and more fun doing my work and writing papers and practicing and doing all the things I was doing than I'd ever had before. Even though I always loved school, there was always other things I wished I was doing on the road, on stage, whatever. So to be able to go back on my own time, even though I was older, I was like 30 and all the students were like, 20, I really enjoyed my time there and learned a lot. To your question, I love going into the trenches of music theory, and I love studying the intricacies of why, there's certain moments where Mozart is doing stuff that's like even more revolutionary than stuff in Chopin because he almost did everything once, right?
Right.
Doing that kind of study during the day and breaking apart, why this interval was considered evil at one point, and all the historical markers of that stuff is what thrills me. I'm talking about the tritone for people at home. But and then going to play, like literally some nights I would go to class all day, and then literally that night I'd be playing somewhere in New York City, playing my music or listening into an Irish folk session or whatever. But it was actually really, really inspiring and energizing to be able to study traditional music during the day and then play folk music at night, for sure. And also, my course of study was I was in the School of Arts and Sciences, not Steinhardt. Steinhardt is more of the performance and musical education college, and I was more in like a historical musicology type program. So while I did study guitar and I did have a teacher and I did practice technique, a lot of the work I was doing was musicological. So I would be in the daytime studying things like, plain chant song during the day, but also studying like the folk revival and writing papers about Pete Seeger. One of my final papers was about Pete Seeger's performance style, and I was able to weave in my experience with him and everything. So it all kind of came full circle in that way. So definitely glad that I completed that part. And now, I have that not just to fall back on, but now when I teach, I have a degree and the experience that comes with the degree to help me be a better teacher.
Bravo. That's a wonderful story, and I'm glad that you had a great experience with all that. And looking at your writing style, the fact that you go back in history and words mean a lot to you, I think that's a great match right there, what you were studying and what you're doing. So some of the song lyrics on your albums cover a variety of topics, from paying homage to the area that you grew up, to coping with the loss of both parents, as you just talked about, within the span of 10 years. And even a song about the celebrity chef, author, and travel documentarian, Anthony Bourdain. Has sharing your thoughts and emotions through original compositions become therapeutic and a form of healing for you?
I think it definitely has in an indirect way. I never really set out for that, but it fills that role for sure. I mean, again, going back, music is something that has just been happening since I first became aware of anything, that I became cognizant of being a human being, whether it was because my dad was playing James Brown records, in my room as when I was a kid or whatever. It always was there. So it's, to me, some people's first instinct is to, check in the morning what the sports column says. Some people's instinct is to do something else, wake up and feed the chickens, right? My first instinct every day is a musical one. So it definitely has, my songs and the music that we perform, the way that, since I'm a confessional songwriter and I come from a folk tradition, the songs are a reflection of me as a person. And the lyrics are like, we said, stories about the things that we've lived and experienced, and trying to put them in a frame where almost anyone could maybe relate to a part of it. And that's sort of the trick, right? If you can get there to be something that is really difficult or hard to relate to, and you can shine a light on it in a way that opens it up to interpretation or to someone just feeling, I think that is why it's so healing. And the songs definitely are deeply connected to working through emotions and trying to place them in certain ways. And I guess language is the way we try to break into that. And I do love writing pure literary type work, whether it be poems or I do write short stories and stuff. I actually have a book of poems that I'm about to put out soon. But lyrics are different to me. Lyrics can be poetic and poems can be lyrical. That's a fact. But poetry and lyrics are inherently different for some reason. And what I think is that lyrics are like a key, but the door that they're opening is the music. And that's what really makes the difference, is the music, even though it doesn't speak with the authority of a word, like a lyric that says, I love you. You can't deny, you can listen to John Coltrane, you can hear I love you in so many of those passages, even though there's no words, right? So I really think that the grounding is in the music always, but the lyrics just kind of help us get into it sometimes, which is why I think not enough people give instrumental music a chance, because there's so much going on in there. But I kind of veered around, but that's sort of where it leads me when I think about healing and what the purpose of lyrics and music are, how they work together.
Bravo. I think you would be an excellent professor. I really do. At a college, tying together literary and music, and poems, and all the above. Fantastic. I love what you're saying. It's excellent.
I think about it a lot.
So in order for my listeners to get a sense of who you are as a songwriter, vocalist, guitarist, please pick 2 or 3 other tracks from your catalog of Jackson Pines recordings that I can filter excerpts into this interview as you talk about them now.
Okay. So first we can go with a song that's from our first record. The first record is called Purgatory Road. We recorded it a few years ago. And if you listen to the song Now or Never on that record, you'll get a really good idea of why Billboard is listening to us, and they're hearing the Tom Petty influence. They're hearing this 70s songwriter influence, but also it's not exactly a pure throwback. It's still a modern, indie folk kind of recording.
It's gonna be a long, long road. God knows it's gonna be tough. No one ever said that it'd be easy, but we got no choice but to put the car in drive and face our fears, trying to seize them. Oh baby, it's now, now and never. Oh no, it's now, now and never. But we're gonna have to try to stay up nights when it seems way worse than it is feeling. But if we don't give up, I know we won't fall. As long as we can keep on dreaming. Oh baby, it's now, now and never. Oh Lord, it's now, now and never. We could have it all together. Oh baby, it's now, now and never. We could have it all.
That song is an example of us trying to write very directly and very simply. Minimalism in lyrics can really be your friend, I think, as a songwriter. I love complex lyrics. I love the early Bruce Springsteen when there's like 47 words in almost every stanza. But he even says, Bruce Springsteen has said that it wasn't until he started listening to Jackson Browne that he discovered economy of language. And he started to feel like, I need to say what I want to say more clearly with less syllables, so it sings a little more. So Now or Never is a great example of a song that I think sings really well. That's a phrase that, another musical phrase that I'm sure comes from way before this, but when I was watching the Beatles documentary, Let It Be, which is just fantastic.
Yes,
if
it
you're
is.
a songwriter.
Yep.
Actually, I said in an article I wrote, if you're a musician, a singer, a songwriter, a pop culture enthusiast, it has something for everyone, that documentary. But what I loved was Paul McCartney in the writing room was constantly saying to John, oh, that line is great, but can we just flip those words or drop that article? I just want it to sing a little better. And I think as a songwriter and a lyricist, that is one of your most important tools, is remembering that although we're writing this stuff out of our minds intellectually, lyrics and what we want to say, you have to remember that you're writing something that is designed to be sung. And it has to sing nicely, whether it's just you or whether you expect people to sing with you as well. Which is amazing because it takes you back to, why is choral music the way it is, and why are arranging habits in classical music the way they are? Well, I didn't know until I went back to school that so much of that tradition comes from the fact that so much of the early written music was just for singers, and it had to sing well, even if it was like a 15th century, sacred piece. So
Absolutely. And to the public that listens to music that have never studied music, how come they can go to a concert and remember every lyric? Because it flows, it has meaning to them, and it's not so complicated that, well, I can't remember this. How's that go? I can't even sing it. So you're spot on with what you just said.
So that's an example of a song where that is our concern, our musical and artistic goal is to make a song that was clear, that was easy to sing, but also sounds good and that we loved. So there's that. And another song I would mention from our newest record, which is called Close to Home. This is a song called Never Gonna Bury Me. It's the second track from our new album. And when you listen closely, it actually kind of sounds like there's some noises going on in the background. But what we did in that one, we recorded it live. But what you can hear is we inserted a field recording from the woods where we grew up into the introduction of that song. So when you're listening to the song, you're hearing my guitar riff, but you're also hearing a true depiction of the environment that we grew up in. So you're hearing the sounds of the trees and the wind. You actually even hear my dog's collar as he walks by in the beginning of the song. Because I'm always into the way that the sonic environment can dictate and change the way a piece of music sounds.
Backyard. Bury the dog when it lived too long. Bury this, bury that. Take my coat, take my hat. Don't you see you're never gonna bury me? Take my name for to drag it down. Pull it with a truck all over town. Grind it up, feed the swine, scatter it all through the pines. Don't you see you're never gonna bury me? Bury me, bury me. Put me under this here tree. I come back like the sun, bones and ash in a heart that hum. So you see you're never gonna bury me.
One of the things that my dad always loved was talking about people like John Cage, and obviously a piece like 433. And for those who may not be familiar, 433 is a piece of music that consists of a certain amount of measures that are all tacit rests. And the point of the piece is not to say, to throw one over on the public or to do something in bad faith. But the idea is from the moment the piano player opens up the piano and reveals the keys and waits, the sound of the piece is dictated by the audience. Does someone cough in the back of the room? Does a door squeak? Does someone groan? So to me, I don't take that extreme liberty because it's already been done, first of all, but I like to inject a little bit of sonic environment into some of our recordings, not to the point where they take over, but to the point where they just add a little something. So when you listen to that song in the beginning, it does get, dropped down in the mix at the correct moment, so it doesn't take away from the song. But you will hear the Pine Barrens and my dog walking around in the beginning to kind of add a little bit of that home feeling of what it's like when we practice, what it's like when we're writing these songs, to really bring you into our world a little bit in between your headphones. So if you can, it sounds really great if you got some cans as opposed to earbuds, because it kind of puts you in that space. And then if you listen to the tune, guitar-wise, it's an example of me paying homage to the Piedmont acoustic guitar stylings of the artists that I mentioned before, Mississippi John Hurt, Elizabeth Cotton. Without them, without their artistry, and without the contributions of Black music community, period, throughout American history, our music would not exist at all in the way it does. It would probably sound a lot more like English ballads. So it's all kind of in there. And that song is a great example of how that, traditional black guitar playing also seeps into what we do. And we try to pay homage to it with respect.
Excellent. So let me ask you, do you have a funny story to share about the music business or another artist you've worked with?
I do. And it's a total coincidence type story. So our band, me and James, we've been driving around mainly the eastern half of the country. We've actually never really gone out all the way west as a band. But we go to Nashville often, and we play mainly these big country fairs that are just outside of Nashville. So it's a kind of gig where, believe it or not, all these years later, I do play on stages. We have all our equipment. We plug into big PAs. We've played at festivals and stuff. But believe it or not, I find myself very often standing, busking in a group of 3 or 4, just like you and my dad did, except playing folk music instead of saxophones. And it's just funny because I never thought I'd be doing that, but it's like watching him do that all those years. I've been drawn to doing gigs where I stroll around a big fair and I play for people who just pass by and just try to make people happy wherever you go. And it's just so funny because I never thought I'd be doing it exactly that way. And then here I am doing gigs like that. And I just can't help but think of my dad when I do that, because now I'm the one engaging the audience, talking between the songs. And it's like he taught me how to do that without trying to my whole life. Because all those Princeton weeks you mentioned, I would be on the side helping you guys carry the music stands and the bag full of charts and all that stuff. And now I do it myself. So it's just a crazy thing how that works out. So one time we're in Nashville and I decided, hey, let's try to play the open mic at the Bluebird Cafe. The Bluebird Cafe is a known room all over the country, possibly the world, for singer-songwriters, especially the Nashville style. And this is not exactly country music. It's related, but it's adjacent. The Nashville singer-songwriter thing is its own breed, and it's a great community. So what you got to do is you got to call on the phone at 8 in the morning on the day of the open mic. And you know that there's about 500 other starving musicians that want to get on that stage that day that are all going to call at the same time as you. So me and James have a plan. He's got his phone, I've got mine. We're going to take turns ping pong and calling. And every time we get the first busy signal, you hang up and immediately call again. So me and James are sitting around in our friend's house in East Nashville after playing, the 3-4 days before. And we're ready to go, and we're going. Well, finally, we get busy signal. Somebody picks up the phone. It was my 97th attempt. I counted them all. Me and James tried 175 times about to get the slot at the open mic, and we got it.
Wow.
So we get the open mic, and now we're hanging out. We're waiting all day. We're playing some tunes. This is our day off. So, of course, day off, you're trying to find somewhere to play, right? So now we got the gig. So we get to the Bluebird, and it's everything you expect. There's a huge line out the door. The Bluebird is sold out every day. It only seats like maybe 80 people. Feels like you're in someone's little country restaurant, but has a circle in the middle of chairs for musicians to play. Actually, on this night, the stage was pushed to the back of the room, I recall, probably for the reason I'm about to tell you. So we're on the list, and we're number 3. So we're ready to go. We got a friend there now, and there's a girl just got into town for the first time from Alaska to play in Nashville. She was like 12, amazing singer, great. A guy from Texas came, it was his 4th time. He was great. Everybody's great, when you're at that level. Even if you're just trying to make it, everybody's great. You have to have something more. But our turn comes, I walk up to the doorman and say, okay, so we're next. And he goes, actually, no, brother, you better sit back down. We got a special guest tonight. I was like, oh, okay. I thought I was all ready to go. Like, I'm in the mindset now. Like,
Right.
There's a little thing you do before you get on stage sometimes, especially as a front person, where you psych yourself out or psych yourself up. And I'm in the mode. Now I got to sit back down. Okay, that's fine. I can do it again. I've done that before. So then they say, okay, everybody, anyone a fan of Rascal Flatts?
Oh.
And everyone starts going nuts. And sure enough, the 3 guys, Rascal Flatts, walk out from the back with a camera crew and all, and they're filming for their new DVD, their new YouTube special. And it's great. I mean, the room is on fire. The electricity is palpable. It's just one of those things. Star power comes into the room, and everyone just sort of bows to it, right? And they're great, right? They do 3-song set. They blow the doors off the place. They're doing 3-part harmony. Lead singers up in high range, It's incredible. And then it's our turn
Oh,
to go up there and play one song.
oh,
Because usually you just play one tune and it's the next person's turn. But Rascal Flatts, of course, gets a 3-song set, of course. And they're fantastic and gracious and whatnot. So, we have to go up there, and I just go up there and say, well, it's going to be glad that we have to follow that. Thank you for being our opening act, whatever I have to say to kind of break the ice or whatever. And then we launch into our most popular tune, which is called Even When I'm Gone. And the crowd loved it. They did applaud very loudly as well. And just a little, wipe a little sweat off your brow, and just another one of those stories for the old autobiography one day. Maybe not the most humorous of all, but that situation as a musician is always very funny when you're ready to go and someone that is very famous all of a sudden performs before you. And you just, I remember what I said now. I made the joke about them opening for us or whatever. And then I said, we're just going to play this song the way we always do. And then I played it. And I think that kind of is testament to our performance style.
wow, that's a great story. I certainly understand the emotions and what was going through your head, but I'm sure that famous group has been there also.
Absolutely.
And then they were lucky enough to make it. And you're on that path, and you're definitely going to make it. Your music is fantastic. And this is a great experience for you to have that, It's like, okay.
Absolutely.
Because you never know who's going to be in the audience either, right?
Oh, especially in a place like Nashville or New York City,
my
but also anywhere. But then really, yeah, if you're in Nashville, and that's the thing, you never know who's going to walk in the room, because that's just, it's one of those geographic areas where there's more musicians than plumbers. So.
Yes. Yes. So take it all in, chalk it up to a great experience, learn from that, and you carried on. And people don't applaud because they want to be polite. They either like it or they don't.
It's true.
Fantastic. A feather in your cap. As a musical artist, how important is the use of social media to you?
I mean, I wish it wasn't, but it's so important, because you need to get the word out on gigs, and you got to get the word out to have people listen to the material that we spend this time not just paying for to record, which is important too, the economic part, but also just the time and the work spent into the crafting of it. So without the social media, it's really, really hard to get people to find you. So whether now it's Instagram, I'm like pulling teeth. They're trying to get me on TikTok. I guess I might have to try. I don't know. But at least with Instagram and Facebook, it's, a great way that people will see you somewhere they're already looking. That's sort of the idea. Now, I'm a little old school in that I love to run everything through my website, which I'm like a .com guy.
Right.
So I'm always trying to pull people off of my Instagram and Facebook toward my website, because I love websites. I love artists' websites. I love that they can curate everything about it. But you do need the Instagram. You do need it because it's the easiest way to get butts in seats. And end of the day, when you're doing music, the people in the crowd is what keeps you getting hired. So gotta use it.
Yeah, it's a necessary evil, as I talk
Yes.
about with my other artists. And it's right up there with, at the end of your shows, you have to sell your merch.
Right.
If you don't have those two, geez, are you a new artist? What are you doing?
Exactly. And that's like one of the most important things. And I've tried to get better and better over the years, especially. And now, like we did, one of the reasons why we're headlining the Pony soon is because we had a really good show there a month or two ago. And I made sure, because sometimes it's easy after the set, especially when you play a really good set, the adrenaline rush is so high sometimes that the last thing you really want to do, even though I'm a people person, I'm not antisocial, sometimes the last thing you want to do is interrupt that high of just being on stage and performing well with running over and now becoming your own checkout guy, right?
Right.
But it's the most important part of the show, except for performing well, is getting there as soon as you can, not letting that line disappear, because people are going, oh, what, is no one gonna, they don't care about the, like, you got to be by the CDs, you got to be by the t-shirts and records or whatever you happen to have, because that is going to pay more overtime than the actual club is going to pay you most of the time these days. You're going to pull in more from merch most of the time than what it is, unless it's a certain gig when you get a guarantee. But, most of the time, and especially even like big signed bands, the merch is where they make most of their touring money.
That's
how
right.
it goes now.
And the venue has a lot to do with it. But as
Yes.
all
Yeah.
artists are, one night you'll be at Carnegie Hall, and the next night you'll be at, a VFW hall. But that's the music business, right?
I've got a great quick one about that for
Go
you.
ahead.
So last year, my band got to play the biggest show of our lives, and we played the See Here Now Festival in Asbury Park. And we were one of 4 regional bands, local bands to the New Jersey area, but that also do more than just play, in our hometown. That were invited to be a part of this big festival, opening for Pearl Jam and the Smashing Pumpkins and Ani DeFranco, all these great people. Billy Idol played as well. And so it was for 2020, then it got postponed, and then we finally got to play it last year. And it was the biggest crowd we ever played for. It was the biggest stage, the most people that I'd ever seen us play at one time. I think the guy who ran the thing, he was backstage watching us because he was so proud. He's always helped us over the years in Asbury. I think he said there was like 3,000 to 4,000 people watching us at that moment.
Wow.
And I told the guys before the set, because I knew some of the guys were a little nervous. I only had one person in my band that day who had played shows like that and played that level gigs often, because he's a touring keyboard player. And I was lucky enough to have him for that gig. His name is Roshane Karunaratne, another person I've known and played with since I was 13 from Jackson. And now he's a touring musician in a bunch of different bands, including the Front Bottoms. But he was the only one who'd been in that situation before, not even myself. So to break the ice right before, we're literally standing in the wings on a festival-sized stage, getting ready to take our instruments and begin. I said to the guys, all right, now enjoy it, because next time we're going to be playing for 12 people. And everyone laughed, and everyone kind of broke up, and we played the set very well. But sure enough, our next show was till like 20, 30 people. So it's just from 4,000 to 40. The key is you just have to play the same every time.
Exactly. That's being a musician. And the same thing. Oh, wow. We played at the Stone Pony. That's what where Bruce Springsteen played and put it on the map. Okay. But then the next day, you're playing somewhere where no one heard, or you're in a park and there's 2 people there. And then they leave after the first song. It's like, no, you have to keep playing, because you never know. Like, you're going to be playing the Pony. For all you know, Springsteen could walk in.
Because you never know what day of the week he's going to show up, or it could be, his manager, or it could just be somebody who has been dying to see you for years that you've never met. And if you don't turn in the right performance, they're going to be disappointed. You don't know if they're there or not, and you don't know who they are, but you know that that's the gig. And to what you're saying as well, yeah, many times we do a gig like the Pony, and then the next day we'll be in a like one time we played at a retirement home for Catholic nuns. And man, they weren't ready for some rockin' and roll and folk music. But once we started playing music, they understand what's going on. They know. And also, nuns are very musical people. They've had to sing almost their entire lives. So when we did that gig at the end of the performance, they actually sang to us.
Wow.
And I felt like I was being hit by a 16-ton semi truck.
Yes.
With the force of the sound of 40 to 50, mainly 80 to 100-year-old women. Some of them couldn't see or hear anymore, but they all raised their hands and blessed us and did this like benediction chorale thing. It was one of the most beautiful things I ever heard. And it's just another thing goes to show, don't turn down gigs because they seem offbeat and weird. Do all the gigs you can, have all the different experiences, because, X out of 10 stages are all kind of really the same. But when you can play music in different places where music doesn't normally go, that really is where it takes you the furthest, whether it's a funeral home or something.
That's right. And that goes for musicians like all of us, that it doesn't matter what artist you're playing behind. If the next day you're subbing for someone on a wedding band, you're playing music. You're offering happiness to people. You're in the happiness business. Yes. And if you look at the band, it doesn't matter if they're a well-known band or an unknown musician. If you see on their faces from the audience that that person's really enjoying themselves, you're enjoying yourself. And that's a true artist.
Absolutely.
I've played with, a number of different artists, and I'm looking in the orchestra, and some of these people are like, I don't want to be here. I can't stand this music, but the pay is very well. And the audience can notice that. The contractors notice that too.
Yes.
And guess what? That person or persons are not there the next time.
Right. The very next time.
The very next time, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
You got it. You certainly get it.
I've had a lot of good tutors and a lot of good people to look up to, including my dad and all of his friends, including you. That's where it all comes from, honestly. I'm not just saying that.
Oh, well, thank you. And I'm sure another musical slang you heard from your dad is, hey, how was the hang?
Absolutely.
Right? The people you're hanging with and talking and humor. That's why we just talked about it.
Of course. And, not to brag on him, but I think that was one of the things, one of his strong suits was my dad was a good hang at gigs.
Oh, my God. I'll tell you one quick thing that he would do every time we would be with the sax quintet. So he had like 3 or 4 things right in a row. And then you're looking at him as he's playing and go, okay, he just noticed something going on in front of him in the audience or, in the streets of Princeton. And we'd stop, big pause. And he starts talking to the audience and they think, oh, he's going to engage them in something. And all of a sudden he's trying to like left-handed, like a left-handed compliment. And it was, it was, you know what I'm talking about. It was just for the benefit of us.
He had the, because there weren't like, right. Absolutely. Only for who's on the quote unquote bandstand, even if you're on the street corner. He had a great way of, right. And again, you're in on it. You're in on whatever it is that's happening. No one else realizes. Yeah. He had an uncanny ability to also not, because there wouldn't be hecklers at things like this, but he could like put a stop to nefariousness in the audience with a glance or with one smile, almost even. Like he had a dastard ability to be in control of the performance situation, which I always thought was really interesting.
So do you have any musical or life philosophies or catchphrases that you live by?
So I did a lot of thinking about this because I don't have one that I've coined and really all the time used, but this is how, and it seems to be the theme anyway. So my dad, he would always say, I'm not playing, I'm working. That was like that was it. I'm not, you say it to people who, whether, just in general with nothing behind it, or with people that thought like, oh, it's so easy, like to just be always gigging. And then it's like, which it is fun, but he would always say, well, I'm not playing, I'm working. It's work. This is serious. And I always took that with a grain of salt, but took it and understood that for what it is. And I really do, especially in conversations with we have a drummer that's been with us for about a year now, but he was new to us. And he's a great musician as well. He's a singer-songwriter in his own right. His name is Cranston Dean, but we spent a lot of time talking about the work and the work ethic. And that's a big part of it. So, he would always say, I'm not playing, I'm working. And I agree. But as a son, of course, I have to amend that and change it because I'm the next generation. So I would say for me, if I had to have a catchphrase kind of thing, I'd say it's work. But if you're not having fun, you're not doing your job. And it kind of goes back to what you said before. So it's work, but if you're not having fun doing it, then your job is still halfway there.
Oh, absolutely. But what your dad didn't tell you, but I know that you know this of him, he had the greatest time. We all did. But for my audience, for my listeners, what we're talking about is that we get bombarded from people who see us go up to our car in a tuxedo. Oh, do you have a job tonight? So I have a gig. Oh, what's that? It's a job. It's a music job. Oh,
yep.
Who are you playing with? And you say, well, I'm performing with so-and-so. Oh, man, that's great, man. You get to play. I says, oh, it's wonderful. Well, why are you leaving so early? Isn't the show about, probably around 8 o'clock tonight? Yeah, I've got to go to Radio City. I'm now leaving 11 o'clock in the morning because they want us there 12 o'clock, to hang for 3-4 hours just to make sure you're all there and you cleared security. Let's do a little mic check, a little sound check, and the rest you're sight reading that night. And then there's an opening act. So by time you're done, I'm back in my vehicle going home. I get home 2 o'clock in the morning.
Absolutely.
So when you calculate that over how many hours from the point that I woke up, got all my reeds ready, all my instruments, went to the gig, played. Yes, it was a marvelous time. I got paid very well. But I love when the people say, oh, that must be great, man. You just show up, 7:30 and played 8 and you play for an hour and a half? No, the artist does that.
Yep.
We're the backup musicians. Sorry.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. The whole thing is a full day of work. I mean, even tonight, I have a gig in Asbury but I got to get out of Dodge at a certain time so I could be there to meet up with James, my bass player, so we can get our stuff together so that then we can be together at the gig at the right time, which is before to set it up, and then other people play and etc. And, it's work, but you have to have fun while doing it as well, I would say.
So, do you have any upcoming live performances besides the Pony or projects that you'd like to announce?
Yeah, so yeah, the Pony, like you said, is on November 5th. It'll be our first time headlining, although we've played there many times, even going back to being 12, 13. It's our first time with our own show, so we're very excited. Cranston Dean, who I mentioned, our drummer, who's also a great singer-songwriter from the Highlands of New Jersey in his own right, he's going to be opening. And then our friend's band, Sean Tobin's going to play with his full band. And then we have a special closeout set. One of Nina Simone's grandsons is actually a active artist now in Asbury Park.
Wow.
His name is Alexander Simone and Houdat Live Crew. And they're going to be closing off the night with a really fun set that we might be jamming together a little bit as well. So we're happy to have him as a part of it too. And then in Philadelphia, the next week, November 12th, we're playing a show at a place called The Grape Room, like the fruit, the Grape Room. And there we're playing with a couple bands from New Jersey that we know and another Philly band that's doing very well. They're called the Tisberries. And we're going to have a really fun show at a classic small rock club in Philly as well. And then for the rest of that, we're going to be recording some new music and working on a new album of original material. And also we're going to be recording a 4-song EP of traditional folk songs that I've researched and gathered that are all from South Jersey and the Pine Barrens where we grew up. And this is another project I've been working on for a while now. Turns out that there was a family in South Jersey named the Ridgeways. They have 2 generations of songwriters, one in the 40s and one that only passed away a couple years ago. And there's a recording that they made in the 1980s of all these songs that they wrote and New Jersey folk songs. And we've been learning them, and we're going to recover them and put them out on a special limited edition vinyl early next year. So that's something to look forward to. It's going to be called Pine Barrens Volume 1. And I'll have 2 songs of theirs, one traditional Jersey song called Mount Holly Jail. And it's also going to have a rendition of a child ballad, which are the old Scottish and English ballads that kind of helped start the folk revival. Turns out this certain child ballad, it's called number 78. It's called The Unquiet Grave. Turns out it's only been collected by song catchers, musicologists in 3 places in North America. One is Newfoundland, Canada. The other is Kentucky. And the only other place it was ever collected was in Jackson, New Jersey, where we're from.
No kidding.
Yeah, and I found the article. Luckily, I still have my college permissions to go into LexisNexis and use the library system. Found a paper that was written in the 30s that traces the lyric and the melody. The guy transcribed the melody himself. I'm going to use that old melody as it was sung in New Jersey in 1936 by a man who was born in 1850. And he said his mother-in-law taught it to him, and she lived in Kyers Mill. And sure enough, Kyers Mill is where my dad and I would be fishing when I was a kid, all those years.
Wow.
I just discovered this last week, and the goosebumps were about a mile tall. So now we're gonna interpret that tune as well. It all kind of comes full circle and back home there. That even a Scottish-Irish ballad, that could only be found in Kentucky or Canada, one person remembered it in Central Jersey, and folk tradition is on.
My God, wow. This is all meant to be. We're coming full circle, not just one place, but many different places. Wow. So where can my listeners find you on social media?
So we're Jackson Pines, just Jackson Pines on Instagram, and on Facebook, our name is Jackson Pines, but if you want to type it in to the browser, it's facebook.com/JacksonPinesNJ. And our music is streamable on Spotify, Apple, Tidal, all those regular services, but it's also available on a website called BandCamp, and bandcamp.com, really jacksonpines.bandcamp.com is where you can buy our digital music, purchase it, and support us monetarily, or buy our CDs and vinyls, and we just ship them out to you through the mail, old school. So that's there as well.
Joseph, all the best to you and Jackson Pines. It's been a pleasure interviewing you. Thank you again for your time, and I know we'll be in contact.
Thank you so much for having me, and have a great gig.
Thank you. You too. Have a great day, Joseph.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for joining me on today's show. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and could hear why my guest got chops. You can follow my podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or Anchor.fm, and stay connected between episodes on Instagram at Got Chops Podcast. Join me on the next episode when we discover why my next guest got chops.